This is the industry discussion on burnout and technology. So the purpose of this panel is just to share what we've learned this week about burnout and engagement. So here are the questions, and I'll just list them out and we'll see where it goes. Is this important to you and why? Do we need this? What do we need to do about it as a community? We have an opportunity to shape next year's programming. So what can we do to make a dent? And what have you heard about that is needed from leadership? And in the hypothetical, what does leadership need from us? So that is about as far as I've thought this through. So maybe we start about, like, is this important? So someone, John, come on, this is actually your idea.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I always say that, you know, I didn't choose burnout chose me. So we had, just to bring it down a little bit, actually, in the DevOps community in Los Angeles, I think it was 2014, a young gentleman who I'd gotten to know at Scale. It's the largest local Linux conference, and this beautiful young man that every year I'd show up, and that's the only time we saw each other. I showed up this year, they did a testimony, and he committed suicide. And it was clearly burnout. And it affected me in such a deep way. I called Gene and I said, do you mind if I write a blog post on IT Revolution? Because what had happened here just took me down as a human. And Gene's like, absolutely. So I put it up there, and the reaction was, you know, like, if you didn't think there was a problem, what we saw in the comments, I mean, there were thousands of comments within a weekend. Me and Gene went on suicide watch for a young man, remember that? We had to coax them, tell them who we were, and then I started getting emails, and I realized that, like, this is a really dangerous thing in our community that we're just not talking a lot about, so.
And incidentally, there was similar cases in the information security community. So our friend Josh Corman was also very passionate about that.
Yeah, in fact, you know, that's how I got to Christina Maslach. For those who saw her, Josh Corman, he's been part of our community, he's spoken at a lot of the events here. He's security, he's kind of white hat security guy, and he immediately sent me. They did. I remember from Christina's presentation the other day. It was called the MBI, the Maslach Burnout Index, right, which is what she created. They actually did an MBI. You can do a specific industry, specific one, and they did one with about 400 people in the ITsec community, and he shared the results with me, and then I started tracking down who was Christina Maslach and what this was.
Briefly summarize, it was as bad as ER.
Well, police officers, ER. I mean, you know what was interesting, and I'll shut up here in a second, but you know, we all do millions of things, and I always go to Gene with ideas, and like we do about 2 of like 98% of the ideas I always tell Gene. But I've always wanted to do that in our industry, because one of the things that it showed is, I think it was the first time it showed in IT, and it's ITsec, that there was a report out there that said our industry is, you know, most of you people think you got the person on the corner like Scott, he's a programmer, he must be happy as all get out. But Joe's a police officer, ER, that must be very stressful. And I thought, you know, wouldn't it be awesome to do an MBI in our industry, and we may do that, where like we could say, well, wait a minute, like, you know, ours is pretty stressful too, and we compare. Because one of the things the index does is it actually compare industry to industry. So you can show where you are compared to like doctors or fighter pilots or anyway.
Can I go?
Oh, yeah, here.
Is it on? Okay. I think it's extremely important, and one thing that has been an aha for me, I would say, in maybe like the last 6 to 12 months, is that in our industry, we focus on resilience, but often it's talked about the resilience of the systems and the services that we provide. But really, we need to be talking about the resilience of our organization and our teams and our people. And it used to be, I mean, I started in startups, and so it was like a badge of honor to pull an all-nighter and stay up and deploy code, and you got back up and you went right back to work the next day. And somehow our industry has not lost that. It's still something that people talk about, like, oh, if you're not sitting at your desk for, you know, 12 hours a day, then you mustn't be committed. And it's so opposite. And as a leader in a big organization, I find myself exposed often to that old way of thinking and figuring out, like, how can I show up differently and engage differently and lead by example, but then also influence our peer group so that they see that you actually get more resilience when you practice things like, I think Josh said in his Ignite or Lightning Talk, mental health day. Well, I was reading GQ on the flight down, and there was like a section about burnout, and it talked about the courage it takes to say that you need a mental health day and how hard that is. And so yes, I think it's extremely important, and I'm glad that we're talking about it more.
Scott, Jeff?
Yeah, so this is incredibly important to me. So, you know, when we did a culture IQ and started measuring NPS and employee NPS, and our first culture IQ results, when we came back, there are thousands of comments, but there were a ton of comments really around work-life balance, right? Which a lot of people saying that, you know, it's not sustainable, and so that kind of really hit me. It's like, this is what I'm doing to people, right? And so it became incredibly important to me to start looking at that and saying, okay, not just how we understand.
Can you speak into the mic?
Sorry, understand that and make it visible. And you saw in the presentation with Brian that part of what he cares about is this also, and really seeing, okay, what on the teams, both from a product development operations, is happening. And a lot of this work, you know, change requests, service requests, pages that happen at night, which is work and disruptions. You know, as an organization, we had no idea, right? I mean, you hear about it and it's there, but we just didn't surface that and make it visible. And the product management teams definitely didn't understand that either. So that was kind of shocking. But once we started to make those things visible, we understood that we had to fix it, because this is something that we were doing to the people. And so that's just kind of been the focus now of the last 18 months or so, of really trying to get a handle on that thing, and then continue to improve it with our folks.
And just like everybody else up here on the panel, it's important to me too. John mentioned a few years ago he wrote that blog post, Karajisatsu, and got a lot of comments and got a lot of emails. Well, I was one of the people who read that blog post, and I was one of the people who sent John an email afterwards.
Now I can say it.
Yeah.
I can say, please don't tell anybody.
So my perspective on what John had written in the situation was, as a leader, and having a team of people and having a company of employees that I feel a great amount of responsibility and accountability for their careers and their happiness, and both personally and professionally. And one of the things that I really appreciate about this DevOps community in particular is the sharing and the learning that happens, and teaching me about things that I needed to know about that were important to my clients and to my employees, but also the caring that goes along with it. It's the most human community that in the technology space that I think I've ever been a part of. And so, as a leader, here's the picture that I had in my head when I read John's post is, Jeff, imagine the situation where you're getting the news that it was one of your employees, or it was somebody that was on your team that did that. And it horrified me to think about that. And that was when it came on the radar, when burnout, that B word, stopped becoming just a word anymore.
So, you know, so a week later, another gentleman from that same company committed suicide. And so one of the things, I got to know Christina Maslik. Again, every day I wake up, I feel blessed. I feel blessed to be here. I'm lucky I got out of high school, and I'm around like brilliant people all the time, right? And then I get to have conversation with Christina Maslik about, and giving her my theories. And so one of the things that, like, again, armchair, but like validate it with somebody who has the ability to at least accept or dismiss the hypothesis. But if you read Carlo Flores, who is the gentleman who I wrote the article about, his tweet stream clearly was crying about efficacy. And if you remember those, so one of the things I think we do a disservice. So certainly we do a disservice if we think that burnout is a badge of honor, right? Let's like obliviate that. But even worse is there's a kind of a difference between kind of clinical onset to clinical burnout and really just, am I just exhausted? And I'm not saying that's not a bad thing, but the things that really are the hidden ones, and these are the conversations I had with Christina about. So in the MBI, there's three. There's exhaustion, there's cynicism, and efficacy. And so, like, exhaustion is kind of easy, I mean, honestly, because you can see it. The one you never see is the efficacy, which is, am I worth, so I work for Courtney scenario, and I go to Courtney, and Courtney's awesome, by the way, and I say this all the time. But like I go to her, and I got this great idea, and she's like, John, not right now. And then a week later, and then I get the sense that like she's so busy, and she's got other things going on. I don't understand the big picture, but I'm starting to get the sense that, do I matter? And I start caving in, and I have a feeling that in our industry, that might be the really, really nasty hidden one. Is again, we can see that we're overworked, the death marches, and as good leadership, we should make sure we cull those. But a little bit about cynicism, but it's that I wonder if we don't have that. The roles that we play today and the things that we touch have such incredible impact on lots of people's lives. And imagine a 25-year-old person out of university who is turning knobs. The night capital. That wasn't. Somebody turned the wrong knob and they lost $420 million in 3 or 4 hours. They were out of business in 24 hours. I think of a lot of our people that work for people might have that sense, like Jason, right? People that work for you, they make a mistake. I don't get to check in at Disneyland. My wife would kill me, So anyway, that's.
So I mean, I'm gonna give you a magic wand for a moment. Like, what would you want to do if you could wave a magic wand that we could do for the programming to address this issue? We got Christine. Dr. Mazlock was willing to come back, right? John and I, we've been brainstorming about bringing in chief people officers, people who are really trying to redefine HR and performance management. So you got the magic wand. The idea box is open.
I'll go really quick, and I'll shut up. I think we ought to just follow through on the MBI. I mean, I think we just, we've been talking about it. Let's just roll up our sleeves and get it done, right? You have the biggest microphone to what you've built in our industry. Let's do an industry MBI, and let's see what the data says. And then we can start from there, because now we get the proof that this has to be changed.
Would there be any interest if we made it possible to do an MBI study?
I like the idea of having industry experts and the chief people officers because they're helping. But the other piece I think that's important is to find other leaders who are making this happen in their organizations, because
technology leaders or
and business leaders.
And business leaders, yeah.
Because to me, again, it goes back to something that Scott said about once you make it visible and then you decide like what you're going to do about it. I would love to hear success stories or things that have been tried to make it better. And I think it comes down to what the organization values. And if you can get that story out there and people can see that, the whole, what you said, it's not a badge of honor and it shouldn't be, and how it's actually building that resilience in the company and helping people be successful, I think that would be powerful.
Something interesting for me that I'd like to see with it is a tie, obviously, to burnout, or maybe it's not always, and then working safely in kind of complex systems. So one is obviously overworking people, but then the other part of it is we're putting folks into systems that are incredibly dangerous, and they make a mistake and it can blow up some environment, and then you've got executives and customers that are actually coming down on that person. That is incredibly stressful. That is terrible for that individual, because it's not their fault that they made a mistake. It's the fault in the design of the system was not designed in a way that could prevent that from happening. So that's also another key area of mine, is to continue to work with my people, architects, to make those systems safe so that they can't make those mistakes, or the mistakes and the blast area of those mistakes that they do happen are relatively small. And then finally, that leaders across the organization understand that this is not a people problem, the failure. It's a robustness problem in the system, but it's also then resilience in the organization to deal with it. And it's very hard to change that culture, because it's really easy to pick up the phone and say, fire someone because they made a mistake, and that's the wrong reaction.
So Scott, I mean, so part of the CSG is a bill printing operation. I mean, if I remember correctly, there's some sort of norms in this in the plants about safety. Can you just tell us what that sounds like?
Well, I mean, everything they do there is a printing facility, right? All the systems are designed so you can't get your hand caught in them. The plant manager's biggest worries are that will happen, and he goes home at night thinking like, what happens if a roll of paper that weighs tons, right, rolls off and could kill someone, right? So they're very focused in these physical systems of making sure they're safe and that the people can't get hurt, and there's all kinds of protections in place. Obviously, in IT systems, since you can't see, the system itself, and OSPA has obviously great, really kind of great pictorial of that above the line and below the line. That complexity that people are managing in creates these kind of very safe, dangerous, and unsafe and dangerous environments, and surfacing that and then continuing to focus on making that better is incredibly important.
Wow, how to tackle that problem with programming. I don't have any easy answers to that because I don't think it's an easy problem to solve. I mean, if it were an easy problem to solve, it would already be solved right now.
Sort of getting this in the wrong order, but I mean, what did you learn about? What do you think? Did you learn anything this week that you think is relevant to making a dent in this problem?
One of the things that I think I relearned in particular was the MBI, the Maslach Burnout Index, and the construct behind that. I now have a vocabulary to talk about burnout in a way that I didn't have before, and I'll relate this to another experience that I had 2 or 3 years ago related to culture. So culture was one of these things for me anyway that was this kind of fuzzy, amorphous, can't really put your finger on it, but you know it when you see it sort of a thing. And when I learned through this community about the Westrom topology, the cultural topology, I now have a taxonomy for this. I now have a construct for being able to talk about culture and describe different kinds of cultures and what kind of attributes are associated with those cultures and characteristics. And because I can describe it, now I can measure and assess certain things about it. And because I can measure and assess certain things about it, I can change it because I know that the actions that I'm taking actually are having an effect on the culture. And the MBI is now doing the same thing for burnout. So instead of just, I feel burned out, well, now I have vocabulary to go in and say, well, tell me about that. What is it about the situation that is making you feel burned out? Is it overwork? Is it cynicism? Is it self-efficacy? Well, I mean, tell me. And then we can start tackling those things. We can start coming up with actions to be able to move the needle and get that person out of that situation.
So for $15 for yourself, you can run that MBI. In one of the presentations I did at QCon a couple years ago, I was asked to give answers. I'm like, no, I'm not certified to give answers. But then it said, well, okay, go do some research on what's out there. So I took this MBI for myself, and I was a doctor at the time, and I was going to just do it to show you how kind of it is. And I a little bit exaggerated the answers to do that. But on the marking of efficacy, and this is why I'm kind of so high in efficacy, literally in the MBI that you run for yourself, so I tell you, just run the MBI, $15. Because the thing, I had no idea that I was fire engine red. I was in the highest percentile for efficacy, beyond the joke of kind of fabricated to make it look good. It was beyond that. And then what it did actually for me is I was at doctor time, I was remote, and I was getting very frustrated that they were doing a lot of decisions without me. I had 10 startups. I'm like, why aren't they asking me? And I realized, because you don't live out in San Francisco, and then the second question was, do you want to live in San Francisco? Like, hell no. I got a house near a lake and on a cul-de-sac with a pool in the backyard. I couldn't afford that in San Francisco. And it would actually started helping me every time I started getting all frustrated about something that happened in the whiteboard and came out, just because I ran that little test for myself.
You said it was $50 to run the...
$15. $15.
Is that a barrier for anybody for running that? I'll tell you if it is. If it is, or you know of anybody that it is, DM me. I will.
Yeah, I would actually maybe to make a concrete ask is let's all take it. And Jeff, maybe I can think about a way to get a population.
At scale, if we did it ourselves, it's like $1. I mean, in other words, if we just create our own and give it to everybody, it's like $1. It scales like ridiculously low. So I mean, either way. But I mean, if you're sitting down and you want to think about it, just go on, do like MBI, and you'll get a couple answers. It's the one that Christina Maslach's on the board. There's a bunch of them out there. It's $15. But again, back to the thing, I think we could create a scalable one for all of this DevOps Enterprise Summit community, and we'd have real data.
Actually, just a little observation. So when we wrote the Phoenix project, this is Brent character, and Brent is kind of a caricature. Brent is, but we've all been Brents, and I'll say something that kind of was a little astonishing was writing that confession for the the router error, right? And I didn't realize there was a dimension of Brent that I just either didn't fully acknowledge or fully understand or comprehend. Like, God, that sucks, right? The stress that causes the physiological response when you're in that mode, right? And you have that sustained response. That was I just kind of realized, oh, that's probably what we do to Brents, right? And lots of organizations have Brents. So.
Well, yeah, I agree, and I also think that there's this false sense of maybe an expectation that Brent's going to raise his hand and say, I have too much workload. Brent is never going to raise his hand and say that, ever. And so, like, how do we, and I was thinking a lot about this because I was like, how can I see it? Like, Jay Paul and I have talked about, like, the weak signals. And it's like, I was talking to somebody last week who was saying, that he went through kind of a dark period over the last few months, and he's like, you will not be able to see it in someone else. You know it yourself, but so like as a leader, rather than trying to identify it, how do I just create the environment where it never happens? So like, to your point, making sure people feel valued, making sure people are part of decision making. That's a big challenge for us right now, is like empowering teams to actually have the decision rights. It's like, that level of engagement is something I can control. But maybe I can't control having an assessment process where I can see it coming. But what can I do differently to help teams feel like they can be successful? I should say individuals, because I feel like it's a one-to-one thing.
Let me riff off of that too. So everything that Courtney said, and yes, it's important to empower teams and to give them a sense of autonomy. And you have to help them get there. And so I've recognized, even just recently, that sometimes it takes a leader to step in and say, this is not right and this needs to change. And it lets that person off the hook from feeling the accountability or the responsibility to work themselves out of that situation. There's real quick situation. I noticed, back to those weak signals, I was having a meeting with one of our teams, and the team lead was supporting a this is anti-pattern, do we get it? A production release window on a Friday night, and we got done with our stuff and we're waiting for other teams to finish, and that lasted until after midnight. Well, I was up with him on Slack, just making sure how things were going. And he let me know that he had gotten in at normal time that morning, 9 a.m. And I'm having a WTF moment. Like, you're working a, 15, 16-hour day at this point. It's not right. And it just wasn't right.
I actually heard, cue up the Steve Spear thing. So I did that confession, right, of the engineering leader who left. Over lunch, someone actually gave me an alternate ending to that story. And I have this card, this is his name. If you're in the audience, it was basically, here is a different ending. An ending that looks like, hey, this is not right. I quit. Here's my resignation letter that I'm going to email to everybody else because it's not right, and this is a norm. That, it's like, and basically paint what it should look like. And so it's not a quiet exit; it is a very loud exit. Like I can't think of the example, but I mean, it was a fascinating kind of alternate universe, right? Where, hey, this is what I believe in. These are my values. This is in conflict with that, and I'm walking away, and this goes out to all the executives, and blah 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 blah. Right? I mean, I thought that was provocative.
Well, and I have definitely been in this scenario, and I'm sure a number of you have, where you're put on kind of the spot to say who made the mistake and who is going to get exited from the organization. And I have genuinely said back, me. So if you're gonna show someone the door, you can show me the door, because I'm the leader who's accountable for this environment, and so that's what I would like to see you do.
This is a brilliant segue to the Steven Spears thing. I'll start with when I wrote that blog article, I literally got 200-300 emails, testimonials. Jeff's already exploded to you, but people, industry leaders, people I didn't even know, people I thought didn't like me. I always start like, John, please don't tell anybody. Let me tell you about my situation. It was incredible. And I thought about, like, why me? Why were they all sending this to me? And I realized somebody sent me this link, and I won't go into it, but it was something about being vulnerable. And I realized I'd been vulnerable. I'd made myself vulnerable to people. So I think the greatest gift, and I'll tell you Steven Spears' quote in a minute, is the greatest gift you can give as leaders is be vulnerable, like Courtney just said. And Steven Spears, and it was either Sidney Decker or Steven Spears last year, and this is brilliant that Gene lets me be this little, like, mad scientist to say, let's bring in Decker, let's bring in, because it's awesome that this is happening. But Steven Spears, we had a debate in that 2-3 hour video we did, and one of the things we kept talking about the edge and powering the edge and making the edge thing, and then the thing came up and said, well, wait a minute, you also have to be vulnerable at the leadership role. Like, imagine the CEO or the CIO going, hey everybody, I don't know how to do this. And like, that just doesn't happen too often, but it's got to be both ways, right? So I think there's some real importance of even our one-on-ones. You know, you might feel like you want to come to me with a story if there's some, like, I clown around, so I'm like this vulnerable guy, so people do come up to me, right? So maybe that gift of vulnerability is how we just...
In fact, the specific Steven Spears quote is like, we can all talk about, like, empowering the masses, blah, 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 blah. But that's impossible to achieve when the leader acts like an arrogant jackass, right? and to model the behaviors of, like, I don't know.
You stand up and say, guys, like you, I just don't know, right? Okay, all right, let's all jump in.
Jeff, you and I were having a conversation. It was and Amy Edmondson, right? It's like, you know, the actual demonstration of to establish the norms, right? Because you're modeling the desired behaviors.
Right. There are a lot of if you know about the Google rework studies. I'll shortcut it for you. They found that psychological safety was far and away the most important factor for high-performing teams at Google. Psychological safety, Amy Edmondson has done a lot of research on that. I would encourage anybody to go read that. Or watch her TED Talk, which is only 20 minutes, and you will pick up some actions that you as a leader or you as an individual can take. One of them is framing problems not in terms of the success or fail criteria, but what you can learn. So they're learning problems. The second is to admit your own fallibility, that you are capable of making mistakes, that you make them, and that you don't know everything, going back to what John was saying, a CIO admitting, yeah, I don't know how to do this. And then the last one is demonstrating curiosity and asking questions. Encouragement. And anybody can do that. Anybody can do that. But as with most things that are new and different and against the grain, it's going to take some courage.
One of the things that we were brainstorming about, and we tried to get it to happen this time, but it just, we didn't have enough time because of me. I screwed up. But imagine a dream, just like we had Decker, Spear, Cook. Maybe it's Dr. Christina Maslach. It's the Prasad Sethi, who's done, was at the helm of the Google rework Project Aristotle. Really, in some ways they were trying to revolutionize how HR and performance management is done. And I saw a talk by the chief people officer of Kronos, and it was spectacular. I mean, they like among the things, they're a 40-year-old company, 5,000 employees, and it was one of the top goals to be one of the best places to work. And so it's a 5-year program. They brought in the SAS Institute, benchmarked not only Kronos employees but all their customers, and they created this front and center. They found that the biggest problem with retention and engagement was bad managers. So part of their top strategic goals and the thing they broadcast out is every worker deserves a good manager. And over 5 years, they've moved to a mechanism where the primary measure for like first and second line managers is totally based on their reports. And then after a couple of years, they now publish them. Right? And it was just, they found they created something called the MEI, Management Engagement Index, and they found just in statistical significant ways that every increase for every 2 points of increase of MEI, there's 1 point of increase for retention, 1 point of engagement in engagement, and then he lists a whole bunch of metrics. It means that our hiring pipeline is fuller than ever. It means that we have a blah blah. I mean, it was interesting, just like the Chris O'Malley talk, right? To hear our chief people officer talk about why that's good for the business. Oh man, it was awesome. Anyway, I would love any comments, thoughts on would that be cool? Yeah. And also Nicole Forsman, right? Dr. Nicole Forsman, to bring to bear the work that we did with State of DevOps. I mean, I thought it'd be pretty interesting.
Yeah, my only and would be, if possible, find a leader or a manager who was part of that transformation who could also share what it was like to be I guess, influenced to change kind of how they were showing up with their team. Because I feel like it's so great to hear about the programs and the industry information, but actually putting it into practice, I think, is what's the hard part. And so I feel like if we could find someone who went through that journey and they would be willing to share, that could be.
So I'll go quickly. I was telling Christina, when she got here, she was like, not in this industry. I said, go meet people. I said, this is a unique community because we actually have been very open to other people coming in. And if you think what's going on here, Scott, you talked a little about like some of the resilient stuff going on and complex systems, right? So you start listening to Decker, Allspar, Christina, there's this little bubble of commonality that just keeps showing up, right? And it's A, it must be truth, right? Because it keeps showing up. But B, I think as we keep looking and bringing all these different people, we keep kind of hearing almost every one of them embedded in there is something around psychological safety. You constantly see this. If we stop blaming people and look at systems, there's no person-actor. Person is just an actor in a system, right? That starts. It starts lowering or hiring the efficacy scale, right, or the cynicism scale, right? It's just, anyway, the beauty of just constantly, that's what, kind of keep thinking of. In fact, my ask is I've been kind of single-handedly throwing stuff at Gene, like, let's bring this one in. Like, y'all need to start, like, if you like this idea of other people, there you go, and put real work on. If there's other people in the industry, like you read a book or something, it's like, oh my God, that sounds like Decker, or that sounds like Christina. Like throw it up here is like, is there any chance we can get that? Sorry.
Yeah, and by the way, I want to sort of, I laugh because that's but how cool is it that we can bring in the best experts, into this community? The person like, whether it's Dr. Stephen Spree or Sidney Decker, Richard Cook, Christina Maslach. So yeah, hey, if you have a magic wand to bring in this person, get it to us. Actually, give it to John. John will. John is like
hey, that wasn't how that was supposed to work.
But I mean, I guess it amazes me to what degree we can get these people, and sometimes it takes a little while to earn the right to ask. But we come up with the right list. I think we can get them.
Can we do a time check?
Yeah, why don't we wrap up at 5? So we said, is it important? Yes. What can we do about it as communities? That's a great discussion. We have an opportunity to shape next year's programming. Got some good ideas. And you had a question, Jeff. Do you want to put it out there in terms of what do we need from leadership, or what does leadership need from us? Do you want to put it out there, or should we end on that note?
I'll put it out there.
Yeah.
It's important. So I mentioned my perspective as a leader. I participated in some open spaces at some DevOps days around burnout, and hearing the people share about their stories who are experiencing burnout, and realizing that as a leader, there are people in my organization that are experiencing that too, and I don't know about it. What do they need from me as a leader? What do we need from our leaders to do or do differently that we haven't been doing? I want to hear that. I want to hear that.
Can I share just one super quick story? So at one point in my career, I had this executive leader in our business who literally said to me, I go and walk the floor where your team works after 5 p.m. and there is nobody here. And then I stand at the elevator banks in the morning and I notice that like nobody's showing up until 9:30 or 10 a.m. And so that has to be the reason why we're not delivering against the expectations that we have for like our delivery. And I was like, wow, that's an interesting comment.
Terrible. Right?
So I was like, well, how could we maybe manage this with some facts and data? Because I was trying to explain that with the work that we do, it A, doesn't always require you to be physically sitting at your desk, and B, we have a lot of people doing work at night and on the weekends because that was the situation we were in at the time. So I actually worked with an engineering leader on my team, and we actually went and extracted all the code commits that were happening outside of normal business hours. And I used that with that business partner to have a fact-based conversation about what was really happening in our environment. And so I share that story just because sometimes I think it can be hard to have the conversation with someone who's got their mindset in a certain space. And for me, I was struggling with like, what could I use to actually dispel the myth? So anyways, it
Can I do one
helped.
quick one? This is just.
I'm going to leave it to Jeff to figure out timing of close.
This is a beautiful. It's the opposite of that story. So when I got to Chef, right, the people who were at Chef, Chris Brown invented EC2. He's chief engineer. Wrote EC2. Is the person who wrote Amazon EC2. Jesse Robbins was basically called Master Disaster. That was his title at Amazon. This was an incredible set of people. Maybe 15 people. When I was there 9, but maybe we got to about 30. At basically 9 o'clock, there was no one in the office. At 5:05, there was no one in the office. And this was an incredible. If you've paid any attention from where they did what they did from 2009 to 2015 to our industry, that was basically a 9 to 5 shop, right? So, and that was about as more productivity that I've seen in most companies that I've been around in the last like almost 40 years.
But imagine what they could do.
24
That's
hours
the point.
a day.
That's the point. They would not have been productive had they been working.
I think there's another. Is there another session right after this?
Oh,
No, it's break time.
It's free.
still in your coffee and soda.
That's great. All right. What was the question again?
Yep. Thank you so much to the panel. DM us. Thank you.
Thank you.